The level to which globe Earth indoctrination permeates the foundation of our very culture is equally staggering and elusive to the majority of souls on the world. Even the wisest among the population have been thoroughly inculcated with the most rigid of beliefs involving a spinning spherical world. Long before we are capable of reasoning or complex rational thought, we as a Western culture are imbued with the steadfast belief that our very home is a sphere set in the infinitude of theoretical space-time. Anyone disagreeing with or even questioning the ball Earth theory is to be shunned and ridiculed according to the federally mandated training centers, with a globe in every classroom. The mid-century advent of the phrase space age, coined circa 1959, although the first alleged piloted orbit wasn't purported until 1961. Thanks to several Mockingbird-esque CIA operations, or precursors to CIA operations, they ensured that specific science fiction programs were broadcast across the 1 or 2 channels available to the public at the time. The War of the Worlds hoax, which was Operation circa 1938, was apparently a primer and a system test, apparently coordinated by some clandestine group, government agency prior to the CIA, or some precursor perhaps to the Office of Strategic Services. Rest assured that the psychological operation involved with the War of the Worlds was at least a test to see, just how many people would fall for the space invaders scenario that we've all grown up with. We had an onslaught of mind-altering drugs, i.e. LSD and mescaline, released to the public in the 1960s, promoted by CIA assets like Timothy Leary and the Grateful Dead, while sci-fi predictive programming in the form of Lost in Space, Star Trek, which were 1965 and 1966 respectively, and let's not forget the I Dream of Jeannie smash on the silver screen in 1965 as well, where the aloof husband plays the role of a respectable astronaut, or astro-liar as it were. There are countless examples of space-aged propaganda specifically designed to capture the minds and hearts of America's youngsters with character-driven, long-term, saga, sci-fi, infinite dramas, ostensibly to solidify the concept of infinite space and so-called other worlds into the minds of the Western world and beyond, of course. As a direct result of the media-driven advent of the space-aged culture fad, an entire generation was more deeply ingrained with the concept of infinite space and the theory of an infinite number of other so-called worlds, more or less not unlike the hypothetical globe we've all been forced to believe in since pre-adolescence. And naturally, the argument follows whenever you try to explain flat Earth to a newcomer, well, all the infinite number of other worlds in the cosmos are spheres, so what makes the Earth so special? Little do they know that the physical plane is completely unlike anything and everything in the known universe, as the physical plane is stationary and is made of physical material, which we are all bound to, and the astronomical plane, or the celestial area, is a mystery, although it certainly could not be filled with many immovable stationary planes as we have here on the ground in reality. The added layer of delusion with sci-fi, Lost in Space, Star Trek, I Dream of Jeannie, these are all classic trademarks of monarch-style mind control as described by many alleged unwilling participants who, although may be questionable characters on occasion, their stories as a whole run eerily parallel, lending credence to the notion that the government has indeed been performing mind control operations and tests on the unwitting public for many, many decades. Recent acquaintances have shed new light on the subject of complete and total indoctrination into the most absurd of beliefs, that is, the belief that the world is a spinning sphere in outer space. The wisest and most clever people have undergone the exact complete brainwashing we were all subjected to as tots. The arguments range from barely worth mentioning due to their complete unfounded logical nature to well thought out, completely illogical, half-baked attempts to rationally consider flat Earth or rationally or irrationally reconsider the spherical world theory. And these arguments always come from a completely unfounded, misinterpreted, misled, and mind-controlled, skewed view of reality as a whole. It is taken for granted, for example, that space must be an infinite vacuum peppered with billions and billions of galaxies, each containing a billion times that many stars, and each of those stars would be home to billions and billions of more planets. From this position of extreme misdirection and indeed ignorance, yet firm belief in the idea of infinite space, although nobody has ever seen infinite space, it is truly impossible to gain a fundamental understanding of the flat and stationary nature of the world from that perspective. Our home, the physical plane, which is both immovable and unlike anything to be found in the night sky, is always compared to and mixed in with all of the so-called other worlds in the infinite space theory. It is also taken for granted that the Earth must always necessarily be considered as a spinning ball housed in a vacuum, and any other line of thought, inquiry, or experiment is deemed useless by those with eyes who cannot see. What use are the eyes if the mind is blind, as they say? But any straying away from the notion that the Earth is and always will be a spinning ball in outer space is unthinkable to the average person that is still plugged into the Matrix, indeed bathing in a vat of pink goo with accordion tubes attached to all of their extremities. The reason fake space is so important to the discussion of flat Earth is because infinite space theory and the reality of the fixed and immovable flat Earth are mutually exclusive. The idea of whether the Earth is a ball or whether it is a plane doesn't necessarily affect us on our day-to-day lives. However, when you realize that the nihilistic culture we find ourselves in is entirely based on the premise that our world is an insignificant speck of dust in the grand scheme of things, orbiting a useless and mediocre star within a mediocre galaxy, that if the entire thing were to explode tomorrow, the universe as a whole would be no better or no worse, statistically speaking, when in fact the exact opposite is true. The Earth is the only physical realm known to mankind, and unfortunately, the Earth is all that there is. We have a front row stage to God's creation, and yet we have all been convinced that our lives and our world and our home are essentially as insignificant as a single grain of sand on the beach. The Earth simply cannot be a fixed and stationary plane, which it demonstrably is, housed within the infinite space theory, which necessarily contains galaxies which allegedly travel hundreds of millions of miles per hour, stars that orbit said galaxies at scores of hundreds of thousands of miles per hour, wherein nothing could ever possibly be in one spot for more than a microsecond, never to return to that point in hypothetical space ever again. If, of course, the exact contrary is true, and the fact is the Earth, our physical plane, has never moved even a single inch. Of course, there are plate tectonics which are not exclusive to a sphere, although many a globehead will argue that plate tectonics is. I would argue, on the other hand, that plate tectonics simply couldn't work on a sphere unless all the plates were moving in conjunction if one plate moved. It would be akin to trying to complete a Rubik's Cube puzzle with duct tape covering the entire outside of the Rubik's Cube. A sphere is such a shape, like an egg, where it is self-contained and there is dynamic tension on every point of the sphere equally, hypothetically of course. So if you were to move one tectonic plate, the others seem as if, instead of being fixed and immovable to grind that plate into the molten lava beneath, the other plate next to it would simply just move in kind. So I would say that tectonic plate movement isn't exclusive to either sphere Earth or flat Earth, but the fact is this could go either way. The globe earthers are very clever to pick their battles, and it seems as if they only pick battles which can go either way. So if something can work hypothetically on a spinning ball Earth, and can work hypothetically on a flat and stationary Earth, the globers will incessantly argue those points and claim that to be exclusive to a sphere. This is a signature hallmark point that globers love to use, and it doesn't just apply to tectonic plates. At any rate, without getting into all the details, psychological operations like the Flat Earth Society not to be confused with eifers, will attempt to discredit the truth about flat Earth by claiming that the Earth is indeed flat, but using logically repulsive arguments including the infinite space model as the matrix within the flat Earth resides. This is so completely fallacious, although most weekend warrior type researchers will stumble across the flat Earth theory, as it were, and then instantly find misinformation from the likes of the Flat Earth Society and form prescribed conclusions that flat earthers are not only crazy, but they're also pretty stupid as well. Only upon digging deeper into the rabbit hole does one find that the heavens above are filled with mysterious lights in the skies, stars and the sun and moon to track the months and the seasons, and in fact the theory of infinite space is nothing more than Hollywood magic and a lifetime of pre-programming. Another example of how the Flat Earth Society will discredit the truth about flat Earth is by making asinine claims like the effect of gravity, or what goes up must come down, is somehow caused by the Earth accelerating upward at 9.8 meters per second squared. This is of course absurd because every flat earther worth their salt understands and will preach the fact that the Earth is indeed stationary. What goes up must come down is also not exclusive to a sphere Earth, and it is in fact the natural order of things, governed by density and buoyancy, and ultimately it appears the static electric charge of the Earth, which provides the underlying tendency for high-density objects to find their way down, and relatively lower density objects to find their way in accordance above them. To argue against a person who is incapable of rationally questioning the underlying basic assumptions which must be granted for argument's sake to arrive at the position that the world is a spinning ball is like beating your fists against a concrete block wall. If you're going to take the position that the world is a ball spinning around the galaxy in 3 different directions simultaneously along conflicting curvilinear paths no less, whilst spinning upon its axis, then you must, by default, go with the agreed upon numbers and figures purported by science and Alliance and NASA, allegedly beginning with Eratosthenes, going all the way to this day with NASA and their values, which just so happen to concur with Eratosthenes' values. I recently argued with a gentleman who emphatically believes that the Earth is a spinning ball, although he would absolutely not agree to the numbers ascribed to the Earth by science with a capital S, aka scientism, aka Alliance. To be clear, we're discussing science as a rigid belief system or even a religion, as opposed to the actual definition of science, which is supposed to be a skeptical method of understanding nature without any sort of bias and independent of our preconceived notions, and oftentimes in spite of our preconceived notions. So I asked him, you mean to tell me that you believe the Earth is a sphere, yet you disagree with NASA's and Eratosthenes' assertion that the Earth's radius is about 4,000 miles in diameter, giving the Earth an alleged bulbous circumference of about 25,000 miles around the equator. So you do not believe that the globe Earth theory demands that you be spinning along a curve of the Earth at 1,037.5 miles an hour at the equator due to mere axial rotation alone. In order to claim belief in a spinning ball Earth this day and age, one must necessarily, by default, yet disagrees with the values purported by globetards worldwide, must wholeheartedly believe that NASA is lying and the infallible empire of Alliance has been wrong about all things cosmology for at least the last 500 years. Although such mammoth entities as NASA and the Empire of Alliance, for some unclear motive, would, in this hypothesis, be somehow deceiving us about the size and the speed of the spinning ball. To what end would such a ridiculous lie possibly take the controllers of this realm? So you will entertain such ideas that NASA is lying about the size and the speed of the Earth, but you will not entertain the concept that NASA and Alliance, just for starters, are deceivers and mindless repeaters, respectively. NASA is shown to be deceptive for multiple examples and cases in point. For example, snorkels in space.
Some drama at NASA now. There will be several spacewalks who attend to a major problem, and this time they're using snorkels while they do it.
They clearly faked the moon landings in 1960s and 1970s. We've seen countless videos of official NASA spacewalks with air bubbles in space, scuba divers in space, impossible lighting from the sun, allegedly during the moon landing footage, which they lost all 400 boxes full of thousands of hours of film, and of course the physics of spacesuits within a vacuum simply doesn't work. I mean, there's so many different examples of why NASA is clearly lying about everything, and the certain people's position is that perhaps they're lying about the dimensions of the spinning ball Earth, which makes absolutely no sense. Or at least, you know, the allegation is that we cannot necessarily believe that the Earth is a sphere with a 25,000 mile circumference. It may be a sphere with a 35,000 mile circumference, and therefore your curvature calculations would be all off, and we don't know because nobody has ever measured the equator firsthand. Now, of course, there are countless people who have circumnavigated the world, which is also not exclusive to a sphere. There are many ways you can circumnavigate, say, your house. If you walk around your house, does that mean your neighborhood is a sphere? The same exact thing applies to the flat Earth. And in some models, the north is in the center, which means you can simply circumnavigate such an AE projection by keeping your compass needle pointed to the right and continuing west along a single latitude line until you wind up back where you started, proving nothing but the lines of latitude appear to go round the North Pole. Theoretical science, also known as lions, also known as scientism, also known as everyone knows that fill in the blank, is comprised of mindless repeaters, exemplified by multiple possible cases in point, but for brevity's sake, one particular example involves the speed of light. I made a video that you can watch, I made it pretty recently, involving how science arrived at the speed of light, or arrived at the number we all use for the speed of light, and how that was the definition of pseudoscience. And even to this day, with our high technology and much better ways of measuring the speed of light, if college students come up with answers that are not in accordance with the ancients' answers when they were using very archaic and rudimentary experimental setups, allegedly using candlelight to focus a beam over 8 kilometers away, and their numbers are somehow magically better than the numbers we can get using laser beams and super fast rotating mirrors. The fact of the matter is, science has been commandeered by essentially religious zealots who follow a creed yet claim to be objective scientists. At the end of the day, if you can't get a person to agree that the circumference of the equator is just shy of 25,000 miles, which is agreed upon by flurfers and globelings alike, then you cannot begin to destroy Eratosthenes' interpretation of the data gleaned from the flagship experiment of his namesake, circa 300 BC. The trigonometry performed by Eratosthenes was indeed sound, although the assumption of an infinitely distant sun and, of course, a spherical Earth must be granted for argument's sake to arrive at the conclusions as Eratosthenes did. The same conclusions were allegedly confirmed by astro-liars at NASA, who claim to have sent pilots on 1970s technology some 250,000 miles to the moon and back, a feat which was never repeated or even attempted until very recently by the Chinese, who clearly faked it as well. NASA even admitted in the 21st century that they were still developing and testing technologies to allow piloted flights beyond the so-called Van Allen radiation belts, which aren't even 300 miles in altitude, allegedly.
We are headed 3,600 miles above Earth, 15 times higher from the planet than the International Space Station. As we get further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. Naturally, we have to pass through this danger zone twice, once up and once back. But Orion has protection. Shielding will be put to the test as the vehicle cuts through the waves of radiation. But Orion has protection. Shielding will be put to the test as the vehicle cuts through the waves of radiation.
But Orion has protection. Shielding will be put to the test as the vehicle cuts through the waves of radiation.
Sensors aboard will record radiation levels for scientists to study. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space.
We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. For this flight, it's time to head home.
By the way, the Earth's magnetic field, plasma layers, and radiation surrounding our magnetic system are not exclusive to a hypothetical sphere either, and the very same features indeed work on a flat and stationary Earth. In fact, disk magnets, which can be found in practically any speaker, generate a magnetic field that is very much akin to the standard azimuthal equidistant projections magnetic field on the flat Earth. Contrarily, never can you find a sphere magnet where the poles behave as such as they do allegedly on the ball Earth. So, flat Earth definitely wins the magnetic field contest, but who gives a damn about facts, right? As for Eratosthenes' experiment, the same data that was used to glean the alleged 4,000-mile radius of the Earth can be interpreted starting with the assumption of a local sun over a flat Earth to arrive at a drastically different conclusion, which is also mathematically correct. The big kicker here is that Eratosthenes and even Christopher Columbus predated human understanding of refraction of light by millennia and centuries, respectively. Refraction of light was not detected or measured or really understood by science until the 1600s. The fact that light indeed bends, or rather alters its course through varying density or temperature media to astonishing degrees, proves that light cannot be used as a rectilinear measuring stick. The atmosphere places each observer within a subjective lens of atmosphere, which is of its highest density closest to the ground, gradually becoming less and less dense as you look directly over one's head. Not only are we all encased inside of a very literal, subjective lens of atmosphere, which follows us around wherever we go to varying degrees depending on atmospheric conditions. This allows for sun, moon, and starlight to change its course multiple times between the celestial light source and the eye of the beholder. There are further, less understood or less predictable potential perturbances of light, including the effects of the Earth's magnetic field itself, because in fact magnetic fields are easily shown in the lab to alter the course of light dramatically, and light will tend to adhere to magnetic fields. Furthermore, the toroidal vortex, which apparently permeates every inch of the known world, caused by the Earth's magnetic field, apparently runs parallel to the meridian lines many miles overhead and meeting with the ground at intervals. There is relatively new evidence captured by Cleo Loy, a University of Sydney, Australia. She was an undergraduate student at the time she made the discovery, using the Murchison radio telescope array in a binocular fashion, where she essentially imaged what appeared to be ionized gases or plasma in the lower magnetoplane. The assumption that light will always travel in straight-line paths was held from at least 300 BC, the era of the alleged grandfather of the globe-Earth theory, Eratosthenes, all the way to the 1600s, long after Christopher Columbus, quote-unquote, discovered a land inhabited by, well, millions of indigenous people, of course. In the modern era, we now know that light will refract and refringe and essentially alter its course when traveling through different gradients of temperature and atmospheric density, as well as magnetic fields and of course plasma. So what happens if I discover your house and your car? Does that mean I get to keep it like Cristobal Colon? Anyway, the assumption that sunlight or starlight must necessarily be traveling in a straight line path, parallel to all the other sun rays necessarily, should have rocked the foundations of so-called science, as many experiments, observations, and entire empires of assumption and conjecture built upon the foundation of light velocity being strictly rectilinear falls apart when you realize that light indeed changes its course when traveling through varying density and temperature media. The purpose of the scientific method is to gather impartial, empirical, unquestionable data, and if necessary, eliminate potential theories as they misalign with observable reality. In this regard, the theory of a rotating spheroid Earth in the vacuum of space as our home has been 100% absolutely, unquestionably debunked and crossed off the list as a potential hypothesis as it is equal parts absurd and ridiculous. Unfortunately, our entire culture has been poisoned with completely unbelievable misinformation, although it was foisted upon us during a phase in our lives when we were prone to believing in goblins, leprechauns, unicorns, Easter bunnies, and tooth fairies. Those of us who were college-educated, or college-indoctrinated, into the religion of scientism more deeply than those who chose to opt out of the federal indoctrination campaign early, are much more entrenched into the deception as the other. At the end of the day, any college graduate with a degree in some field of science will not be able to answer a very simple question regarding the curvature of the Earth. I asked an educated man recently if he knew such a formula, and he replied with a guess: 1 meter per 1,000 meters. Without trying to transpose that into the common system of measurement, I pointed out that this type of equation describes a slope, not a curve. Although several of my friends, including the 1 meter tall Gare from Berens, would have my neck for using the 8 inches per mile squared equation, as the spherical Earth is not allegedly a square, according to AutoCAD and many a better mathematicians than I, the 8 inches per mile squared calculation does seem to work very accurately, at least up to several hundred miles, which is about as far as we could ever possibly see thanks to the atmosphere. The fact of the matter is, it certainly is flat Earth researchers who know the curvature equation to describe the amount of curvature to expect over a given distance, assuming, for argument's sake, that the Earth is a sphere with a radius of about 4,000 miles. Now, try arguing the curvature formula against a globehead who will not even agree that the Earth's radius is allegedly 4,000 miles. At the end of the day, roughly a third of the people surveyed in my recent experience about flat Earth were open to the idea and provided half-hearted, often poorly thought-out rebuttals to why the Earth cannot be a spinning ball, although they do have the upper hand because they get to say, "You think the Earth is flat? You must be some sort of a crazy retard," and socially, society will take their side every single time because everyone knows the Earth is a spinning ball in outer space, of course. One participant asserted that the spin of the Earth is what caused the effect of gravity, while, of course, this is exactly the opposite of what you would expect from a centrifuge. The ignorance and arrogance, while completely innocent in nature, of our culture is encapsulated perfectly by this particular anecdote. To assert that gravity is caused by this spin of the Earth is tantamount to proclaiming that water always flows uphill, the sky is green, the grass is blue, and all mountains are made of cotton candy. The funny thing is, I had no idea how to respond to such a completely asinine statement. The spin of the Earth causes our feet to stick to the ground? But sir, that is absolutely ridiculous, even coming from a globeling.
Well, you're the one who believes the Earth is flat, buddy.
Good sir, are you telling me that the spinning ball Earth, hypothetically a centrifuge, somehow operates in the opposite fashion as all other centrifuges in existence?
Whatever do you mean?
What I mean is, a centrifuge causes an acceleration towards the outside edge of the centrifuge, away from the axis, not an inward pull towards the center. The theory of gravity, what you believe in, is only necessary to counteract the hypothetical centrifugal acceleration, which should be an angular acceleration, again, towards the outside edge of the centrifuge, allegedly generated by the imaginary, non-existent spinning ball land you believe in.
Whatever do you mean?
Never mind. There's no point in having this conversation because you are so enthralled by the ball Earth theory, your brain is incapable of functioning properly.
Them sounds like fighting words.
This sort of complete lack of common sense is not for lack of intelligence or cleverness or wit or education. It is the direct result of a lifetime of programming which begins in elementary school and continues on through adulthood in the form of science fiction sagas which capture our minds with the most absurd deception, making it nearly impossible to awaken even the sharpest among us from this matrix-like slumber of duplicity, sans the pink goo and spinal tubes. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, this channel is viewer supported, so if you'd like to support the channel effort, your help is greatly appreciated. You can do one-time contributions through PayPal at www.paypal.me/TheMorgile, or you can become a patron at Patreon for as little as $1 per month at www.patreon.com/TheMorgile. God bless you guys. Thanks again for watching, and as always, spread the word, spread the world, and peace out, everybody.